They called him a traitor, a man who sold out his country, a man who crossed a line no spy should ever cross. But history is rarely that simple. If you look closer, beyond the headlines, beyond the condemnations, you find a story of sacrifice so enormous, so misunderstood, that it may have saved millions of lives. This is the story of the spy who betrayed his nation in order to save the world. The world of the 1960s was not one of peace. It was a stage balanced on the edge of annihilation. Two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, pointed thousands of nuclear weapons at each other, like loaded pistols pressed against the temple of humanity. Every day, ordinary people went to work, kissed their families goodnight, not knowing if tomorrow the sky would still be there. And inside the heart of Moscow, one man lived closer to that abyss than anyone else. His name was Oleg Penkovsky. To the Soviet Union, he was a decorated military intelligence officer, a man who had climbed the rigid hierarchies of power, respected, trusted, untouchable. But to history, he would become something far more complicated. Penkovsky had seen the truth up close, the dangerous brinkmanship of his leaders, the reckless secrecy, the terrifying fragility of a world built on silence and lies. He knew how fragile the balance was. One mistake, one miscalculation, and millions could die in fire and ash. He was horrified. Horrified not as an officer, not as a Soviet, but as a human being. And so he did something almost unthinkable. He reached out, not to comrades, not to allies, but to the enemy, to the British MI6, and later, to the CIA. It is difficult to understand the weight of that choice. In the Soviet Union, betrayal was not just punished, it was erased. To be caught meant not only death, but disgrace that bled onto family, friends, children. Yet Penkovsky stepped forward, willingly, into that abyss. He believed that if the truth stayed hidden, the world would not survive. And if the cost of revealing it was his own life, then so be it. In the quiet corridors of Moscow's military offices, behind the locked drawers and classified folders, he began a journey that would alter history, a journey that would lead him into shadows so deep no light could follow. The spy who turned against his own country for the sake of humanity. Why would a man in his position take such a risk? Why gamble everything? His career, his freedom, his family, even his life on a chance that the truth might matter? The answer lies not in ideology, but in conscience. Oleg Penkovsky believed his leaders were steering the world toward a war no one could survive. He believed, as he later told his handlers, that preventing a nuclear catastrophe was worth far more than his own existence. So he began to pass secrets. Not whispers in dark alleys, not scraps of rumor, but the crown jewels of Soviet military intelligence. Blueprints of missile systems, technical manuals that revealed weaknesses in Soviet rockets, precise locations of nuclear launch sites hidden deep in Soviet territory. It was as though he had opened a vault and placed the enemy's most guarded treasures in Western hands. Each document he passed was a piece of truth pulled from the shadows. Each meeting with MI6 or CIA handlers carried the weight of destiny. And each coded message, smuggled photograph, and hurried exchange was a heartbeat closer to discovery and to death. His work reached its climax in 1962, when the world held its breath during the Cuban Missile Crisis. On one side, John F. Kennedy, young, untested, facing down a nuclear arsenal that seemed unstoppable. On the other, Nikita Khrushchev, fiery, unpredictable, playing a game of bluff with the fate of humanity. But behind the public speeches, behind the tense standoff broadcast on television screens, there was Penkovsky's voice. Through the secrets he had leaked, Washington knew what the Soviets could truly do and what they could not.
They knew which missiles were real and which were empty threats. They knew the limits of Soviet power, knowledge that gave Kennedy the confidence to call Khrushchev's bluff. Think about that. A single spy moving silently through Moscow may have shifted the balance of the most dangerous confrontation in history. Historians argue, even today, that without Penkovsky's intelligence, Kennedy might have miscalculated, might have yielded too soon or pushed too far. And had he done so, the skies might have filled with fire. Instead, the missiles in Cuba were withdrawn. The world stepped back from the edge. And millions of people, millions who never knew Penkovsky's name, lived on because of him. Yet as the crisis cooled in Havana and Washington, the walls in Moscow grew colder, tighter, more suspicious. The KGB's eyes were everywhere, and the spy who had saved the world was already running out of time.
But here's where the story twists. Because while some hailed him as the greatest spy of the century, his own country branded him something else, a traitor, the most unforgivable word in the Soviet lexicon. In Moscow, betrayal was not measured by morality, only by loyalty. And when the KGB uncovered what Oleg Penkovsky had done, the sentence was swift, brutal, and absolute. The net closed around him silently. Conversations grew shorter. Colleagues looked away. The invisible machinery of suspicion had turned its eye toward him. And when the moment came, there was no warning. Only a knock at the door and the world collapsing in an instant. He was arrested, dragged into the shadows he had long feared, questioned for days in cold rooms where the walls seemed to listen. There were no open trials here, no chance to plead his case, only the silent judgment of a system that considered mercy a weakness. Behind closed doors, his fate was sealed. A handful of men decided the price for what he had done. To the West, he was a hero who had prevented catastrophe. To his homeland, he was nothing but a traitor who fed secrets to the enemy. And so the verdict came: execution, the final erasure of a man who had tried to save the world. They say he met his end with dignity, refusing to beg. But history is murky here. Official Soviet records were crafted to humiliate him, to paint him as broken, cowardly, small. Perhaps that was the last punishment, to deny him even the grace of truth in death. His name was struck from honor rolls, his image blackened in propaganda, his family left to bear the scar of his shame. Generations were taught to despise his memory, to whisper his name only as a warning of what happens to traitors. Think about that for a moment. A man who may have prevented nuclear war erased from his country's history as though he were nothing but a villain. It's a paradox that lingers even now. Was Oleg Penkovsky a hero, a traitor, or perhaps both?
To understand his legacy, you have to see the ripple effects. Oleg Penkovsky's intelligence did not only defuse the Cuban Missile Crisis, it reshaped how the West understood the Soviet arsenal for years afterward. Generals studied his documents, politicians measured their words against his revelations, and in the silence of back rooms, the balance of power shifted, not by missiles launched, but by truths whispered. He had altered the course of history without ever firing a weapon. And yet, truth is dangerous. It makes enemies on every side. In Russia, his name is still synonymous with treachery. Children were taught never to speak it, except as a curse. In the West, his memory lingers with quiet admiration, but without ceremony. Because how do you honor a man who saved you by betraying his own? Maybe that is the tragedy of Oleg Penkovsky, that his courage lives in a shadow no one dares to step into, that the millions who may owe him their lives will never know him, and that the line between betrayal and sacrifice can be so thin you only see it clearly decades later. There are experts who still debate his motives. Was it conscience? Was it ambition? Was it desperation to escape a system he no longer believed in? The truth is, perhaps unknowable. But what is certain is this: the documents he carried, the secrets he risked everything to share, helped keep the world from sliding into nuclear fire. And so, as you finish this story, I want you to imagine yourself in his place. You are a soldier sworn to your flag, a father, a husband, a man bound by loyalty to your country. But you see your leaders steering toward the abyss. You know silence will mean destruction. Would you stay loyal to your oath, even if it meant watching the world burn? Or would you break every vow you ever made if it meant saving lives you would never meet? For Oleg Penkovsky, the choice was clear, and it cost him everything. The spy who betrayed his country to save the world.